Speaking of good movies, welcome everyone to the Anatomy of a Film podcast. We're on episode 2 now. Holy smokes. Soon to be 200, what was it, 62, 64?
Yeah.
But I am your host of 3, Bill Griff. With me as always is Eugenio.
Hello.
And here we have the esteemed Lil Souffle.
Greetings. Glad to be here.
He's found his mic. It took a police siren for him to find his mic, but we're all here. We've all assembled in one house together under God indivisible with liberty and Wanda for all. Wanda is the film we are discussing. If you guys watched the first episode, Wizard of Oz, we spun the wheel. My rec won. Very, very happy about that because I've really been wanting to check this film out for a long time. It's number 48 on the Sight and Sound list, if I'm not mistaken. Made in 1970, written, directed, and starring Barbra Loden. This is a really great film. I just want to say that right off the bat. I really enjoyed this. But this was my first time watching it. I know, Souffle, this film was really impactful to you when you first saw it.
Yeah, it's been one of my favorites for the longest time. And just this rewatch kind of like, because I've always knew I love this movie, but like rewatching it for this episode kind of like enlightened me onto why I love it, if that makes sense. Because like when I first watched it, I was definitely very inspired by it. You know my taste. I love the French New Wave, the Cassavetes, like very hands-on, like the camera, just like very small crew, just take a camera and shoot with like non-actors, actors. And so I was very, of course, very influenced by it the same way I was very influenced by Godard and Cassavetes and these other directors. But like it is a movie that like did touch an emotional string with me when the first time I watched it, but I didn't really pay too much attention as to why. But now going back like and seeing it again, it definitely is a film that resonates with me even more now. Like it, not to get into it right away, but like just the emotions that like I really understand like Wanda as a character, and then I really understand Barbara Loden and what she's trying to say, and also what she's like also not trying to say, but like what she's like going through. Like I get that feeling of like not having agency in your own life and just kind of like trying to find agency or trying to find purpose, if that makes sense.
It almost felt like you could feel it through the film that she was trying to just let something out by making this movie. Like
Yeah.
she just had this feeling in her that she wanted to do it. She wanted to make this movie. And from what I've read and heard from her in interviews, it was one of the few things in her life she was able to complete, and it just is really beautiful watching this film with that knowledge, just knowing that she's able to fully embody this vision she had for this film.
Absolutely. Just for the people who don't know, this is going to be a fully spoiler-filled discussion.
Yeah. If you didn't know Batman was showing up in this, well, now you know. Okay. Too bad. Check it out. Definitely recommend watching this film if you haven't. So check it out prior.
Yeah, so Wanda is a 1970 film, as Bill mentioned, written, directed, and starring Barbara Loden. It is actually the first ever recorded film directed, written, and starring a woman. Like, the same woman, of course. Which is crazy. Like,
That is
1970.
crazy. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, maybe probably feature film.
Oh no,
There's
definitely
probably many
feature.
short films.
Definitely feature.
Well, the synopsis of Wanda, it's actually it's a very straightforward movie when it comes to like the plot. Well, the letterbox synopsis of Wanda reads: After a string of abusive relationships, Wanda abandons her family and seeks solace in the company of a petty criminal. I don't know if that description fully encapsulates what the movie is about.
Yeah, you guys also saw the Cavett interview. It's like it feels very redundant because he's also like when he's interviewing Barbara, he's like, "Oh, it's just about a bank robbery, right? It's just about."
Yeah.
And she's like, "No, it's more than that." It's like, but he's just about bank robbery. That's all that happens, right? And it's like yes, that is on paper. It like the letterbox description is what it is, but like the movie isn't really about any of that. How would you word it?
It's an interesting thing. I think naturally we'll talk about this later as well, but I think it's interesting to talk on it right now. because Wanda does feel like very much a movie that is kind of like deglamorizing the crime drama and the road movies and all those things. So it's very, in a way, it's reductive to describe it as with a simple synopsis because it's really a lot more than just that, and it's also criticizing those things. So it's very ironic that in the Dick Cavett review from I think 1972, might have been 1971, Dick Cavett says like, "Oh yeah, it's a movie about a bank robber, right?" And she's like, "No, it's about a woman who hooks up with a bank robber." And he goes like, "Oh, so that's what the movie is." And she's like, "No, no, no, wait." And it's just interesting to describe the movie with like superficial actions like violence and a heist and a romance
Romance.
because it's really a deconstruction of all those things and a deglamorization of like the crime genre in general, which I think it's really interesting.
What I love about Wanda is that you really can't box it into one or two genres. It's
That's
very
true.
much its own thing. And it is very much deglamorizing all of those genres at once.
Yeah, like you can mention a couple genres. Like you could try to fit Wanda into primarily crime, and then a road movie, and a romance, and a drama. But drama is always too vague. Like every movie is a drama.
Yeah, but not
So
only does it not like romanticize it, but it's also like it makes it like these exciting things like very mundane. It's like about the mundanity of like being on the road and doing like these petty crimes and like just it just makes it
yeah,
all like feel like very like dry and very like sad, if that makes sense.
yeah, maybe. So if you go back to like the very early mentions of genres with Aristotle, and you can just call it you can just call Wanda a tragedy, and that's like the entire genre because it's not a comedy, and that's all based on like the ending of the film. Like if the ending is bleak, then it's a tragedy, and if the ending is happy, it's a comedy.
A tragedy is very fitting to put
Yeah.
into this film, to label it.
Yeah.
A modern genre that I am starting to unintentionally add on to films I've been seeing, particularly these types of character studies, is loser core. Shout out to Mike. In a sense, Wanda could be looked at as loser core, but I view it more so not Wanda herself would be considered loser core, but Mr. Dennis's character, the bank robber she gets involved with in the film, is very much a loser. Like
Yeah.
he's and we could talk about the characters right now if you guys would like to. Who would you like to go over first?
They're both there's just so much there with both Wanda and Mr. Dennis. I feel like we should just talk about both of them. They go
Yeah,
pretty
they
hand in
they very
hand.
much go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Dennis to me seems like a character who wants to be in control at all times, and maybe he grew up being in a position where he had very little to no control of his life. And throughout this movie, you can see him being refused over and over again by anyone other than Wanda in the film to comply. There was a man he tries to seek solace with when he is driving away from the robbery with Wanda. He says no. He goes to his father to give him money. He says no. The bank manager he's robbing, doesn't even comply with him at first. The only person that he feels some sort of authoritative power over is Wanda. And I think that's why he does, in a sense, he does latch onto her. He's trying to grasp at straws for control because he wants to be in control. He wants to make the decisions. So he's making decisions for her. And Wanda as a character, Souffle said this term earlier, lack of agency, which that's the only word I can think of to describe her character. She's someone who needs, sadly, needs someone like Mr. Dennis to make these decisions for her because otherwise she feels like she's moving through life without a purpose. But it's weird because she rejects these purposes that's bestowed upon her at the beginning of the film. The film starts with her signing over her divorce papers to her husband she leaves, to the children she leaves behind, who, mind you, are in the courtroom with her, and she doesn't even look at them, doesn't even acknowledge their existence. And I think just right off the bat, that scene was very powerful for me in defining what kind of a person she is that runs away from these kinds of responsibilities in her life because she just doesn't want them. Maybe she's too afraid of them. But what were you going to say, Eugenio?
Well, I was just gonna argue that, like, I do agree to a certain extent, but I think that leaving her house, like, that's the first decision we see her take, which is leaving her husband and like accepting the divorce and leaving her like married life behind. I think that decision kind of takes agency. I know that in a way, maybe it doesn't feel like it in the movie because she's kind of just like, I really like the word that Barbara Loden uses to describe her character, which is that she's floating, and that's kind of what she is doing the entire time. She's just floating around. She's just drifting. You know, it's like if you're in like the ocean, you can either swim or drown. But what Wanda's doing is just she's floating. She's not dying. She's not leaving. She's just there. To like the point of like the children, I think it's we don't know how she got married, but she kind of just stumbled out of her marriage. She's like, just like, oh, one day she's not married anymore, and that's kind of the whole idea of like her not doing anything, not having anything to do. She's just like there. It's like why somebody just coming over and telling her exactly what to do kind of gives her a purpose, even if she's being abused. That's kind of like what gives her life any sort of meaning now, because it's like okay, it's either I'm just walking or I go over to pick the burgers, and it's like okay, I have something to do now. It's not just
Yeah.
die.
Yeah, because that family life, you can already tell that it was like a very just sad and mundane like family experience. Like just the way the husband talks about Wanda, like there's little like remorse, not exactly remorse, that's not the right word, but there's little affection in the way he
Yeah.
talks about her, and it's just like you can tell that it's just not like a good family dynamic, and it's also rejecting like the stereotypical like maternal roles of the time, moving away from that, because in a fucked up way finding comfort in Mr. Dennis, who's like a total social outcast, but like gives Wanda purpose in an unconventional way, but in a way that like isn't too tough on her mental being, but something she needs direction, but not like aimless direction, like raising kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a lot more straightforward, and I think a big thing that I wanted to discuss is the whole setting of the film, setting like the Appalachia region of the United States. I wanted to bring this up earlier when we were like introducing the film and stuff. So the film takes place in the Appalachia region of the United States, which is a mountainous region that starts in Alabama and it ends up in Pennsylvania, I think. It might go all the way to New York, I don't think so. But it goes through several states. And the movie takes place, of course, in Pennsylvania. And the Appalachia region is one of the most impoverished parts of America. And that's where Barbara Loden grew up. She grew up in North Carolina, not in Pennsylvania. And the movie takes place in Pennsylvania. But it's really interesting to think how that aspect affects the movie and affects her life. But yeah, it's like a very impoverished region with coal mining as its major industry. And back in the 50s, 20 years, well, not 20, depends on which year of the 50s you're choosing to focus on. That's when mining technologies and mining like mechanization started to happen in that region. So a lot of people started to just stop working. They would get fired and stuff. I think right now the Appalachia region in the 2020s, its unemployment rate is lower than 2/3 of the national average. And I think that aspect influences the movie a lot, and the whole idea of like just kind of being there, because it's this like small-ish community, is very impoverished, and there's not really anything, there's not much to like do outside, and most of the time you just get laid off having nothing to do, and Wanda is an example of that. Yeah, I think it's an interesting aspect of the movie to talk about like how the coal mining industry and like the mechanization of coal mining and the Appalachia region all work towards making this for the film. And I think it's also important to note that the movie was actually initially supposed to take place in the south region of the United States, probably Alabama, if I were to guess. But since they needed to be closer to New York, they just chose Pennsylvania instead. I think it's a decision that absolutely changed
The
the
aesthetics
film
of
as a
it.
whole.
Yeah, rewatching it, like it really focuses on like the industrial background of it, like the factories and the smoke and like the coal. It really reminded me of Red Desert, and more recently Sean Baker's Red Rocket, like just the way it like captures like the community and how like industrial it is, opposed to like the film, and each one of them is like a character study in their own way, but I just find that fascinating. Almost the environment is like a character of its own and adds to it.
Absolutely, and like Sean Baker, him is like he's a realist himself, like not a realist but a neo-realist. And Wanda is kind of a neo-realist movie if you like think about it. And actually, Barbara Loden was greatly inspired by Andy Warhol films as well as Italian neorealism and direct cinema when she was making this film. And you can definitely see all the neorealist aspects of the film.
The film is also another add to it. I don't know if this is like due to like its restoration, like or like how long this film has been, but it's like I love how grainy it is. Like, and it's not just like normal 16 millimeter grain. It's like great, like really grainy and like very like it has kind of like a decrepit look to it almost. You know what I mean? Which also is fascinating. Like I don't know if that's intentional or not, because I know like film can expire like that pretty
It
easily.
actually was intentional. Barbara Loden said in the AFI interview that Nicholas Preferis's cinematography background was mostly done in documentaries. This was his first feature he'd ever shot, and she was very much inspired by newsreels and documentaries and stories that had that grainy look to the picture quality. She wanted to have that encapsulated in Wanda so that it kind of embodies like this documentary style in the film, which definitely is the feeling I got while watching it, especially during the third act of the film.
I guess they just left the film to expire a little bit because I know I do that for photos and film, like just leave it out and then it gets like grainy and like scratchy and stuff, which is what you usually I guess want for aesthetics.
Yeah, I mean, the story of how the film was, the story of the release of the film is really interesting. And I think it probably wasn't as grainy as this on release. I know that the original print was very like well taken care of, but there was a really big problem with the reprints of the film to like distribute
Mm.
because they since they didn't have enough money to like do very high quality reprints, they would just come off like very poorly made. Like I don't know if you guys remember in the Dick Cavett show, like her interview, you can see like a clip of the film and that looks like it's aged horribly.
Oh yeah, that looked bad. That looked really
Yeah,
bad.
and that's because they didn't have enough money to like strong quality reprints of the film. And then the story of how the film was restored is actually really interesting. It was back in like 2007, which is 37 years after the film came out. A laboratory for restoring films in UCLA was about to shut down, and a couple people were there, like went there just to like examine what could be salvaged and what couldn't. And in that place, in like that laboratory like basement, they found the original print of Wanda, and
Oh my
it
god.
was untouched. It was like very well preserved, but it was one day away from being like completely destroyed, like thrown to the garbage. And so in 2007, with funding from UCLA and none other than Gucci, in a campaign they had started, like Gucci had started a campaign to restore films directed by women. And with the help of those two like forces, they restored the film. And then in 2010, the restoration came out. I think it was, if I were to guess, it probably came out in the Venice Film Festival, since the film originally was released in 1970 in the Venice Film Festival. It won the prize for best international film, and it was the only American film at the festival. But after that, nobody picked it up, and nobody wanted to like release it really. So it had a super limited release, and it kind of died after the festival run. Well, the festival run, quote unquote, but it had never really had a run. It was just a Venice. Some copies of it like it still existed and would be played every once in a while. But it wasn't until the 2007 restoration was made, well, 2010 restoration was made, that the film started to really get more and more and more appreciation and like accessibility, of course.
It's always so crazy how close we come to losing such great pieces of art, like especially mostly when it comes to like film reels and stuff, because like that stuff is hard to take care of and just
Think of movies like Metropolis or Que Viva Mexico or other movies that like just got lost to time.
Chest of the Wind comes to my mind immediately.
yeah, because for Chest of the Wind, that story is crazy. Like Iran completely almost destroyed all negatives, and then like I think it was the original negative was found in like an antique shop.
Yeah, plenty of cases of like just governments burning movies. But yeah, and what we're talking about, like facts revolving the production and the distribution of Wanda. I think it's so insane that the movie was only made by four people, like four crew members. It was just Barbara Loden, who was, of course, director. Then there's the cinematographer, who is also the editor, and his name was Nicholas T. Proferis. And then Harry Schuster, the producer, and then Lars Hedman, who was the lighting engineer and the sound engineer. And there was also Harvey Greenstein, which is a very fortunate name. But yeah, Harvey Greenstein also did the sound. 5 people on set, or 4 people on set plus a producer, which is really like it's so crazy. Actually, Barbara Loden, as we also in like the cabin interview, she said that it was easier because you don't have people just laying around, or as she put it, just laying around being bored. Everybody has like a very integral and a very integral like job.
It's also a more intimate way to make movies, to be honest, because like when it comes to larger crews and stuff, like it gets lost in the like the
In the sauce.
mechanicalness of it all. It's not like you're making art anymore. Like this is more like a 9 to 5 job. As someone who's been in both types of sets, like I definitely prefer like this way smaller crew because it feels like we're really like putting all our eggs to like try to make something. It feels more
It also
personal that way.
sounds it also sounded a lot more distressing for her since it was her first gig as a writer and a director and a star of a film. She had a lot on her plate, and just being able to only juggle a handful of crew members probably made things a lot easier for her.
What would you call it? Like, there's probably a name for these directors who start directing their own movies, like Charles Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Jack Tati and Lena Dunham.
And Ben Affleck,
Ben Affleck, of course. Ben Affleck.
the Oscar-winning auteur.
And also Cassavetes, of course.
Well, I
Cassavetes didn't
see
start in
that.
his own film. Well, no, he
He
did.
does. He does.
He
He does
does,
star in a lot of
but
his own films, but
I
he's not like
see it, but I don't fully see the Cassavetes. I see it like in terms of the way Barbara directs her actors, a lot of non-actors, and that she uses her script mostly as a placeholder with a lot of
Yes.
improvisation in between, which is very much Cassavetes. Cassavetes, which I hope we talk about him a lot throughout this podcast journey because I love that filmmaker a lot. His whole style was about the actor, making the actor comfortable, but also taking them out of their boundaries, pushing them, bringing out interesting emotions from them just naturally, not having to be robotic off of a script. I very much enjoy their styles for sure, especially like Wanda is fantastic.
yeah. Yeah, that's the other aspect that's like so like inspirational to me. Like just the fact that like you don't need these extensive crews or like of course all films are expensive, these extensive budgets, but like this movie was only made for like 100K, which might seem like a lot, but for like movie standards really not that much. And just like how she was able to like just make this film was like quite an achievement on its own because like it only had like one producer, right?
Yeah, it only had one
Yeah.
producer who produced the entire thing, and it was her.
Yeah.
It was her friend.
Yeah, it was her old friend who she reunited with, if I remember correctly, the story. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I'll fund the movie," and she's like she didn't think that was like legit, but like it
It
turned
turned
out
out to
to,
be right.
yeah, it turned out to be legit, and like he did finance the movie, which is awesome.
The total budget turned out to be about 115 grand.
That's about $1 million today. It's $950,000, which makes it sound like a lot more.
Yeah, but that would also include like the film cost for 16 millimeter because back then it was cheaper, but like if nowadays with inflation it would be much more expensive.
Yeah, and Loden would argue that she paid everyone,
Yeah,
every actor and everyone in the crew. They got paid like fairly. You know, when in most sets you have a lot of interns and PAs and people who don't get paid, which
yeah.
is really unfair, of course.
They get paid in experience.
Truly, my hat's off to Barbara because like no one would have the courage to do all those right off the bat.
And it was her one and only film she did direct, at least feature,
I
which
mean,
is very
I know
sad.
she did. It is sad because she did want to direct more, but like unfortunately she passed. I believe she died of cancer like in 1980.
Yeah, she died of breast cancer in 1980. She was only 48, but she had worked as an actress beforehand. She had been in a movie directed by her to be husband, Elia Kazan, in one of his films. I don't remember exactly which one, in 1961.
The film was Splendor in the Grass, 1961.
Yeah,
Blender in the
Splendor in the
grass.
Grass. She also was a Tony-winning actress for After the Fall, which is a play. It's a play about Marilyn Monroe. It was released in 1964, and of course, for those who don't know, Marilyn Monroe died 3 years before in 1961. And the play was written by Arthur Miller, who was Marilyn Monroe's husband for a few years. And Loden won an Oscar before for playing Marilyn Monroe. And that's so, well, not an Oscar, sorry, a Tony. And that's so shocking because this role as Wanda, that's like the opposite of a Marilyn Monroe role. Like, I just think of Marilyn in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and this is like the absolute opposite. But there's also like an aspect of it that's similar, which is actually, I'm gonna save that for later.
And apparently, she only casted 3 professional actors in her whole film. Everyone else were non-actors, locals in the Pennsylvania area. Her co-star Michael Higgins played Mr. Dennis, which he himself has a pretty wild, random filmography, including Synecdoche, Stepford Wives, Rumblefish, Angel Heart, a great De Niro film. And the
The
other 2
Conversation.
actors, yes, The Conversation. The other 2 actors were the soldier in the red convertible towards the end of the film, as well as the woman at the brothel that she ends up in at the end, the very end, the woman who invites her inside. But other than that, everyone else, including her husband, the children, the old man picking up coal, everybody was just a non-actor that she recruited. And a lot of them actually turned out to be the parents of all of these children who signed up to her ad that she wrote. So she originally wrote out a local ad in the papers for actors she wanted that were local to the area. And all of these children showed up, even though she only needed to fill out 2 spots to play her own children. But she was really enamored by a lot of the parents and how they looked. And she ended up casting a few of the children's parents to play roles. Some of them included the woman who played her sister at the very beginning of the film, which honestly, great casting because she does look very similar to Wanda. I also think that's an interesting aspect of the film is that she utilized all these people who were not professional actors in the slightest, but she also explained how difficult that was in the sense that they would keep looking at the camera or they wouldn't get the words right. She ended up just completely abandoning the script when it came to their roles. Like the judge, for instance, at the beginning of the film, his voice is so good, she described, but his physical presence on the film was terrible. So she only used his voiceover and primarily focused on a long take of her entering the courtroom, which honestly is a brilliant choice. I feel like it worked perfectly, and especially where it's like, it's almost as if we, the audience, are judging her. We're looking at her from the POV of the judge, which in turn, I think that decision worked out really well. And another actor I wanted to bring up that she talked about is the old man who is sifting for coal towards the beginning of the film, where she asked to borrow money from him to get a bus ticket to go sign her divorce papers. While she was location scouting, that old man was just there in that exact same pile of rock sifting for coal. She approached him, so what are you doing here? And he apparently was just a really interesting guy. He gave his whole life story to her and said, "Oh, this is very interesting what you're doing, making a movie." And then she asked, "Do you want to be in a scene? We could film you here tomorrow, same time." And all we do is just film a simple sequence of me approaching you, asking to borrow money, and you just hand me some, and that's it. Maybe just add a little more to it. And he was down. He was totally interested in it. But she said the day she comes back there to that area, he does show up, but he's a completely different person. Like he's completely closed off. He's completely closed off because he told her that when he went home that night to his wife, he told her what she told him about the option to act in her film, and his wife told him, you can't tell her anything. You have to be very reserved and quiet. You can't tell him about our lives." And and so he was just like very anxious and quiet and was just very trepidatious on what to say in the film that she ended up barely using any footage of him for that scene, which I think is so hilarious. But it's really true to life though. Like most of these people have never acted in a film ever. Like and probably it's their only acting credit in their whole lives. And so it's kind of like those 5 seconds of fame you get on TV where you become like a statue, you don't know how to act. But some performances I think were really well done. Like her husband, for instance. You could have fooled me if that guy was a non-actor or not. Apparently he was just a jelly salesman. Like he's just a guy who worked there near Scranton, agreed to the advertisement, and boom, got casted in a movie. Yeah, I love the way she worked with the actors in the film. Very much reminiscent of Cassavetes. Again, we'll just keep talking about that, but
Yeah.
very cool. I
Yeah,
love when people do that, when filmmakers just have the gall, the bravery to do that shit.
yeah, the performances are so powerful in the movie throughout. Like, be outside of like the non-actors, whom I think all are like serviceable. They're okay. I mean, well, not okay. They're better than okay for what they are and what their performance was
Okay.
Damn,
portraying.
damn,
Damn
Eugenio,
it.
shots
Yeah,
fired.
he just
Destroying.
they're fine. They were fine.
You know what? I'm gonna call up Jerome Thayer, who plays the husband. He's gonna come out. He's gonna come to the podcast next episode. He's gonna say, "Listen, man,
No, no, I like the actors, but especially I think Barbara Loden gave like a masterful performance in the movie.
no doubt about it, for sure."
Yeah, like she's so incredible. She like completely disappears into the role. It's so non-unexpected. It's so well, so expected, I guess. It's so expected that she would do that since the film is largely based on her life and her experiences. And although not necessarily fully in an emotional like an abstract and subjective way, it is based on her like experiences. And she said she felt like Wanda before. And an interesting like inspiration for the film, which I think was the main inspiration for the movie, was that Barbara Loden once just read a newspaper article in 1960, and I actually found it. It's about a woman who, like, her boyfriend or husband, he robs a bank, and she gets convicted for like 20 years in jail for being like an accomplice. And when she got convicted, she told the judge, "Thank you." She was finally out of this like idea that she doesn't really have to leave anymore. She just, okay, finally she has some stability of some kind. People are going to be telling her what to do every day, and that's so in a way so relaxing because it is such a like torment. It's not as like freedom is always seen as like a widely only positive thing, but there is so much torment that comes with free will, and it is a topic that gets discussed. I don't want to be like, oh, it's never discussed, but it's not discussed as much as it should be when it comes to like how often of a conversation freedom is. But yeah, like the torment and the physical and mental and psychological and emotional like burdens that freedom puts on you, that sometimes it's just better to not be free. Some people would like not agree with that at all, but some people would feel a lot more comfortable without any type of freedom. And the newspaper, actually it's called The Bank Robber Who Played a Dangerous Game, from the Sunday Daily News, and it was released on March 27th of 1960, 10 years before the movie came out. And it's so interesting to think of like this, or like Dog Day Afternoon, which is another film based on a newspaper article, like where all these movies and the ideas for movies come from, which is also very inspirational, influential. Like you could literally read the first thing that you see when you go outside of your house and make a whole movie about it, and for people to still be talking about it 50 years later.
Why do you think it was that she was inspired by that newspaper article in particular?
I remember she says at first she was like confused to why she got like 25 years when she basically didn't really do anything, when she was just like witness. I mean, she was an accomplice, but like how Barbara says it, she didn't like actually physically do anything. And then she was even more confused when she said thank you. She was wondering why did she say thank you? And just like I guess that question kind of led her to like start developing Wanda and kind of like putting herself in like a similar position, kind of morphing that story into like a very personal story for her regarding like her own struggles and like her own marriage with Elia Kazan, which I think is fascinating because in the end Wanda in the movie isn't arrested like the way in the story is. I don't know what that change means because the ending is definitely very very interesting.
The ending feels hopeless, really. And I think that was the point. She wanted to leave because originally she actually did film the true ending to the newspaper article. The film originally ended with one of the women at the brothel recognizing her from the news and calling up the police and her getting picked up and arrested. But in the editing room, so much of the film changed. Apparently, a lot of scenes were cut out from the original script, including the ending because she felt that it just wasn't right. Just wasn't the appropriate way to end Wanda's character. And it makes me wonder if Wanda would have also said thank you
She
to
would
that
have.
sentence.
I
Yeah,
think there's something to be said that like because if Wanda is like a self-insert of herself, like she didn't give herself the quote unquote happy ending of being like sent to jail, but instead gave it like a very hopeless ending, like just that final shot of like how it lingers and then it just like kind of fades. It's like very very depressing.
it
I
is.
mean, I think it's a very bleak ending for the film, but knowing the context of the film and that Wanda was herself, the mere existence of the film, of the idea that, like, okay, Barbara Loden actually did get past all her, like, anxieties and, like, her troubles, culminated in this movie being made, which is, like, in and of itself, like, a showcase of agency and care. When you think about it that way, I think it's not as sad because yeah, maybe the film is sad, but maybe that's like one of two roads. You know what I mean? And the actual road that did happen in real life, it's Barbara Loden made this movie. I don't necessarily think that Barbara Loden was in a situation as dangerous as Wanda's. I think it's more the idea of like drifting and not doing anything with your life. The ending is like, but taking out of context, like in a vacuum, just watching the film as it is a very bleak ending. It makes it seem like Mr. Dennis was a better option, even because at least she would consent to like what she would do with Mr. Dennis. Not everything, of course, and of course, you can always argue that since she was being like tossed around, she wouldn't really like fully consent. But it wasn't like in the last scene of the film where she's being sexually assaulted by that soldier guy and she's screaming no, no. In a way, you could even say that Mr. Dennis is like he gave her some agency by the end.
Yeah. When she goes to the bank and realizes that Mr. Dennis is dead, you can I think it's a very powerful shot because even though we don't necessarily sympathize with Mr. Dennis, not at all, you can tell like it's like a very hopeless scene for her. Like all the people around her, it's like like you can see it like the shot physically like traps Wanda in. I think it's like it's why it's the shot of the Criterion cover. Like I think it's just a very powerful shot. Like she's kind of like drifting away, being like trapped in by the crowds of people and she keeps trying to go see. It's like even though Dennis is not the fucking most amazing person ever, you could tell that this was something important for her. Well, not important, but like something meaningful because like we said, he gave her that agency, but also gave her purpose aside from just being like a mom or like having to
Yeah.
do like these continuously mundane tasks. Like the tasks she had to do were extremely simple. Like go get like 3 burgers without onions.
Most importantly than all, she was needed. Because in her
Yeah.
house, you can see at the beginning, she wasn't needed. There's this other woman who's being a mother figure to her children.
Well, that's actually her sister's house
Yeah, that's her
she's
sister's
staying at.
house.
Oh, that's her. Oh, okay.
And her
Yeah,
sister, she's just sleeping on the couch.
the husband of the sister is not like that she's there. But it's pretty much would probably be the same scenario because even her husband had a new girlfriend that's like holding the children. There's that very interesting line in the court where he's like, "Oh, we're gonna marry so because the children need a mother," and it's like,
Exactly.
I also want to bring up, since you mentioned she had a purpose or she had something to do because of Mr. Dennis and his orders, his authoritative position above her. The only ounce of confidence I think she displayed in the whole film, as fucked up as it is, was when she was robbing that family's
"Oh
house with
yes,
him.
yeah,
When she grabbed the gun and pulled the man away, threatening him after Mr. Dennis was overcome by the bank manager. That's the only instance where you're like, oh shit, she's actually coming into her own, which is so bad to think about in retrospect. That's the only ounce of confidence I could see in her character throughout the whole film was when she had the gun and had the decision to make.
Yeah, like you can Dennis was kind of like already like failing there, but like she like completely like takes the gun and overpowers that whole situation. It's like so interesting. But then she like arrives late to the bank, but
Yeah.
the whole bank plot was already like because you mentioned earlier that like no one listens to Dennis except for her. Like he can't even rob this family correctly without her to like kind of save him.
And even though she does listen to Dennis, she messed up on almost all of his orders. Like when he did ask for 3 burgers,
Bring
she
three.
forgot to get rid of the onions, and she didn't even know where the burger place was, and he asked her to get clothes. She buys all these clothes that he ends up throwing out.
Yeah.
And of course, you said it at the end, she does not even know how to get to the bank. And the car gets registered by the police officer. It's
Yeah.
so bad. Like she doesn't belong there. That shouldn't have been her life, sadly, but that's all the drive she had.
And that like asks the question like what should have been her life, because she wouldn't fit as a mother, she wouldn't fit as like a criminal. We see her in like multiple things, like she gets robbed at the movie theater, like she only fails. We don't have any indication of anything that she wants, like.
Well, she tries to get a job at the beginning. She tries to get a apply for a seamstress position, but the man says she's too slow. Then that propels her into just wandering around town. I'm sure we'll be talking about a lot of shots in this film, but the first one I want to talk about is I love when she's wandering the mall and looks at all of the mannequins of women with these fancy clothes on and well manicured, and that shot of her just looking on, sandwiched between all these mannequins with all these designs she's looking at, and then she kind of just looks down at the ground, walks away. Something about that scene just really encapsulates her identity crisis she feels in this film, where she doesn't know what she wants at all, really. She's looking at all these different ideas, these stereotypes that are assembled together in this storefront, selling to consumers, to women, what they should look like, and here she's looking at it and sees nothing in herself. And I really love that scene so much. I think that definitely paints her character well within those few frames.
Yeah, I didn't. I did love that shot, but it didn't register in my head. But what you said was so awesome. Like, yeah, like kind of these ideas of like maternity and like what it is to be like a woman in this time in society, almost rejecting that, going into this life of like criminality and like, but like not even in like a good way. Like we said, a lot of times it's just like in a way, this movie is kind of comedic. I love the interaction when she goes into the bar and we as the audience can pretty much right away tell that this guy does not work here. That this guy is like obviously sticking up the place. But she's like, "Oh, I want a beer," and like and then she's in the bathroom for so long, just like stop. Like I don't know, I can't tell if like she's almost purposely like fucking with Mr. Dennis sometimes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like also when that scene again, we could bring it up, but the when bringing the burgers like only bringing two, I think, and like and they're all like stuffed with like onions and a bunch of shit. When he explicitly said he didn't want anything, I just think it's so I don't know.
It almost feels like a deconstruction of like the American dream in a way, which is such a cliche thing to say. But it's like sometimes there's no, I don't want to say there's no happy ending, because kind of the existence of the movie itself is a happy ending, like I mentioned before. It feels like an inescapable world for her. Like we talked about those mannequins, and yeah, those mannequins are like representations of what she can become, but at the same time, they're just mannequins, and they honestly have had the same impact on the world as she has. She like hasn't quote unquote touched any lives. She doesn't have friends. She is just there. She just wakes up to go to bed. She's just living in order to die. And those mannequins are like trapped, not only in like their bodies but also in like the glass. In a similar way, she is trapped. And I like the idea of like a subversion of the road trip genre, or like the road movie genre, because in those movies the road is freedom. You're going away, like you're flying and you're like, yes, I'm getting away from my like this life. The road trips are kind of in a way a path to liberation, but in this movie the car is just another prison where she's at. And I really love the way she shoots the car sequences. I think it's very impressive, especially the close-ups and all that. Shooting a car scene in the 70s was not easy at all. and the way she just pulls it off, Barbara Loden and her cinematographer, it's just so impressive.
Yeah. I mean, it's still not easy to shoot in a car. Like it's a big hassle. It's so annoying. I forget what you said in the Cavett show, but you said that like they really had to be like very squeezed in inside the car to get
Yeah.
those shots. But it looks great. Like it feels so natural. Like the shot of her like in the back seat, I get almost a full view of like the entire interior of the car. Like I just don't know how that was possible.
Yeah. Also the shots of her like driving and Mr. Dennis driving as well. You can tell that they were really squeezed in, but at the same time they were just it works. And those like very extreme close up make it feel more intimate with what's happening in the story. Earlier on, Souffle mentioned like the role of women at the time, and that's something I really wanted to talk about. So, little rundown. So, this movie came down in like the peak of the second wave of feminism. And just for like a little bit of context, so first wave feminism in the West, this is all feminism in the West, was with the goal of suffrage, getting the right to vote. But yeah, and then the second wave of feminism happened in the 1960s, or what largely led by the writings of Simone de Beauvoir, as well as some other feminist writers. And the goal of second wave feminism was to talk about abuse and lives in the home for women, and equal pay and equal opportunities come from mostly for women in the second wave feminism, at least as we know them today. And even though Loden herself doesn't consider Wanda to be a feminist film, I think it's incidentally so, but it is definitely a feminist film because it's just a portrayal of that. Like, you're not fit to be in a household, you don't belong here, and they're just like on the streets until, well, she ends up like engaging in like sex work and stuff like that, and essentially she gets like assaulted, and she ends up in a life of crime, and at the end of the movie ends up in like a roadhouse. And I think it's so integral to like where the movie is set, the place where women were at the time. It drew a lot of criticism at the time from a lot of women critics, especially Pauline Kael. She was a very prominent critic, and she didn't like the movie at all because she said that the character of Wanda was dumb, and so it was seen as anti-feminist to have a character like Wanda that was just like strolling around. But in reality, it's a criticism of the fact that these women can exist in the world and are existing in the world. You can't really separate the place where Wanda is mentally, psychologically, physically from the ideas of the patriarchy.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I agree
very
completely.
well said.
And in the way she like portrays all these like quote unquote failures is how she gives her character humanity. Looking at like Loden's work before this, model and like a dance girl in like the Copacabana and stuff, it's so interesting to see the way she frames Wanda's character around in a similar way, where her existence is kind of focused on pleasuring men. She fails at pleasuring men, her husband, at the beginning of the film, so she ends up going to like the streets, and then she has to give pleasure to Mr. Dennis, not necessarily sexual pleasure, but just pleasure in general, and that's how she defines her own value as a woman and as a person. And it is so sad, but it is raw and real, because this is like generally a really raw movie.
That's
Yeah,
interesting you mentioned pleasure as the way she views men throughout the film because I really love the way Barbara Loden filmed the sex scenes for the movies or for the film, which is devoid of it entirely. The only inklings we get of the sex scenes is the aftermath, the awkward pillow talk conversation that happens once the passion is left. That's when the truth comes out in what the men's intentions are. Which the first man, we haven't even talked about this part of the film yet, but she picks up a man at a bar, or he picks her up. We don't know exactly. He buys her a beer. He picks her up. And they have sex in a motel. We only see the scene afterwards where he's getting dressed and about to leave, but she wakes up and follows him out. And then the second sex scene is the aftermath of Mr. Dennis, and he is staying in bed and he immediately jumps to asking her for the burger order. So it's really interesting that she, even after having sex, she tries to please the man when she sees how they're trying to leave or trying to give orders to her. It's really sad watching these scenes play out. It's very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And I love that Barbara Loden embraces that uncomfortability. She wants the audience to feel as uncomfortable as Wanda is in these situations with these really terrible men.
because he's almost like chasing after like the first guy. That first guy's like really trying to get out of there, like
Yeah,
dressing fast, and like she kind of wakes up, and it's like that one like static shot of it. And it's just like so.
And
uncomfortable.
Yeah,
yeah, and she gets in the car, and then he drops her off at like an ice cream shop, and that's where she goes to the mall and sees, and then eventually finds Mr. Dennis, and they go to finds Mr. Dennis in this bar.
that's why she kind of attaches herself to Dennis because like her first husband like is trying to get her away and be with his new girlfriend and try to like get a quote unquote better mom for their children. And the second the second person we see her with, this hookup, that he's literally trying to get away from her as soon as possible, but Mr. Dennis instead like stays and is actually like, even though it's fucked up like you said, that like he's demanding things, there's at least something he needs her for, you know?
You know
Yeah,
what? Completely forgot, but there's actually a scene where he hands her a newspaper to read off, revealing to her that he is in fact a criminal who robbed that bank, that robbed that bar she was unaware of. And he pulls over and offers her the chance to leave. So in a sense, he's also wanting her to leave. But this is the third time now where a man has had her leave, and I guess third time's a charm. She's offered the choice to leave, and she says yes. She wants to continue being with him. She refuses actually to leave. So in a sense, I think that hookup scene at the beginning was very detrimental to the story to progress the her relationship with Mr. Dennis and why she wanted to stay with him, as opposed to just leaving when she is offered the chance to get out of his car.
yeah, and the scene where she's not allowed to get her job back is also adds to that like world of her not being wanted anywhere. As fucked up as it is, Mr. Dennis gives her something to do and something that makes her feel needed. Like even if it's just burgers, those are like at this point in her life, burgers are life and death. It's like either do burgers or just stroll around, and you're like, well, I might as well do something. And I think it speaks to the human condition in general. That just the need to, in a way, struggle and strive for something and work and do something in order to get whatever you need to get. If it's like some, just to get occupied. Because we kind of don't want to just float. We would rather swim or die. As someone who has been in similar situations when you just feel like your life is just like drifting away towards nothingness, it is so relatable and it's such a painful experience to be in, because at that point you're just like you feel like you're just waiting to die. And I think the film captures that feeling really well. And it at that moment, even the smallest of actions can define your entire day, like just going to get burgers.
Well, just burgers in the end.
Yeah, one is about the
But
burgers we made along the
it's a
way.
little crazy that that burger scene has come up so much, but it is.
I know, I'm getting hungry.
I think it comes up because it's a very good representation of all the things that happened in the
Of
movie
both
with her.
characters. I also like my burgers without onions, if that means anything.
I love onions on
Caramelized
burgers.
caramelized onions on burgers, though.
Oh,
I
any type
also
of
love
onion really.
I also love the little moment when Wanda's like, "But onions are good. I like onions." And the guy's
Yes.
just like, so you can tell he's pissed because I actually really know that feeling of like when you take the onions out when the order was wrong, but you can still like the
Yeah,
flavor's still there.
that's it doesn't leave. That's
Yeah.
there forever.
There's there's also a really interesting quote by Barbara Loden from back in like the 50s when she used to go to the movies. This is on Ali Akbar's book, Real Women Pioneers of Cinema, 1896 to the present. And it's a quote by Barbara Loden, supposedly, that says, people on the screen were perfect and they made me feel inferior. And I think that's a huge quote to us, to like what the film is doing. Because Wanda is far from perfect and nobody wants to be Wanda. So it doesn't like create this, like the mannequins that Bill was talking about, like it doesn't create this image in your head of like what you should be or what you should be doing. It more so is just like this. Yeah, setting these expectations like unrealistic expectations of what you want to be. It just puts a character in a very unpleasant situation. And this is around the time where movies were starting to do it, especially in the United States. Other countries had started doing this a long time ago. But in the 70s and late 60s, that's when movies in America got a lot darker. And it was less about, like, I want to be that star, I want to be Cary Grant. This is actually a little bit more profound, if you will.
Yeah. Is there any more in the same vein you guys want to talk about? Because I do want to talk about Eli Kazan for a little bit. I didn't know about Barbara Loden the first time I watched it. It was only on this rewatch where I saw the documentary on Criterion and the Dick Cavett show and stuff like that. But she was married to Elia Kazan, and the way she describes her relationship with Kazan is very interesting. Because she was like, Elia Kazan was someone that like she looked up to, because she of course wanted to direct movies and such, and like just her wording of certain things that like he was very like kind of assertive. I believe were the words she used. It seemed like a very like kind of fucked up relationship. And also, so watching this movie again, I was like, Mr. Dennis seems like a placeholder for Elia Kazan. And when we were talking before we recorded, Bill, you said that the in the AFI thing, she literally said that.
Yeah. She said that not only was he a placeholder, but she also had Michael Higgins wear her husband's clothing for the character. They altered his appearance a lot too. She had him cut his hair. He originally had very long hair. He was barefaced, but she asked him to grow out a mustache, wear some tinted glasses, almost kind of start to look like Elia Kazan in a sense, because the way Michael Higgins looked prior to filming Wanda, he didn't look like the character at all, like that he would represent on screen. She, in a sense, had him as a placeholder, and contrary to popular belief, Elia Kazan actually had little to no interest in her film or didn't really give any support for her. He wasn't a producer, he wasn't a consultant, really. She wanted to just do it on her own. Either she wanted to do it on her own, which she definitely did,
Yeah.
or he probably just also had no interest in it because their marriage was very rocky, from what I'm led to believe.
Just the way she
Very
talked
rocky.
about him. And
Yeah.
because like she also did mention in the I Am Wanda doc that he was like also very like assertive. He was like kind of director a lot, and it reminded me of the way like Higgins kind of like, even though Higgins is like completely neurotic, there's like an exaggeration, but the kind of way he directs Wanda a lot, like the Mr. Dennis character, like he needs to be in control of every little facet that's going on because like there's a lack of control in his life, like we talked about,
Yeah.
and it
I can
makes
only imagine how much of that was adapted from her marriage with him, but those are things we'll just never really know.
yeah, it is an interesting parallel to think about.
That's interesting. I did hear that their marriage was very tumultuous, and at the end they were really really estranged. They did get married in 1967, and they never divorced because Barbara Loden died in 1980. And but they were planning to divorce. Well, by the time she died, and it's interesting. I've heard so many different tellings of Elia Kazan's role with Wanda. Some people say that he had nothing to do with it. Some people say that he started writing the screenplay and then gave up on it and gave it to Barbara Loden, which I personally don't believe is true. But there are so many like different things. I've heard him talk very well about Barbara Loden in some places, and in some others he talks about it very poorly. Like he would compare her to Marlon Brando in her like prominence in acting, but then in his autobiography he said, which actually ties in a lot with what you guys said, but he explicitly said that Barbara Loden would often frustrate him because she was very hard to control. I don't know how deep he meant with like control, but yeah, that's like a quote by him that she was a very hard person to control. And he died not too long ago. He was 23 or 24 years older than Loden, and he died 20 years later. He died in the 2000s.
What I wouldn't give for having that to be reversed in their lifespans. Yeah, I just feel so sad whenever I think of Barbara Loden's life. Just the fact that she couldn't get any other screenplays off the ground, any other films after making Wanda, and she was struggling to try to make something happen. Even in her documentary I Am Wanda, we see her as an acting coach, which it looks like she's thriving in. Like the way she's directing a pair of actors in that documentary is very beautiful. Really, really amazing work that she's doing. But you can tell she's just itching to go back to the director's chair, back to doing something else, but her body's not allowing it. And it's just very sad. I could only imagine what kind of things she could have made in her life that I think she would have thrived in. Ugh. You know, I I joked about this with Eugenio earlier, but in all seriousness, like her and a Jenna Rollins movie would be incredible. If she directed Jenna Rollins at all in the 70s, oh, chef's kiss. That would have been insane, an insane pairing. That would have been like off the charts, too powerful to conceive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand why people would see her life as tragic, but by the end, well, allegedly, she's claimed to said that she was very in peace with her death. And it's interesting because if she was at one point the type of person like Wanda, where she was just wandering and floating through life, going from person to person, like she would say, because that's a word, a phrase that she uses a lot when describing the movie. She just goes from person to person. I think looking at where her life ended, I think it's very inspiring. Of course, life itself never really ends. You know, like you will, there are always goals that are not fulfilled, that are always, there are always potential, there's always potential for more. By the end, it looks like she faced death without being afraid of death. She made so much in her life, and she took some like huge strides from what she said she was. And it's, I think it's a very inspiring story. Even if it is tragic that she passed away so young, it is still like quite a life to have lived. And we are still like, she died in 1980. We are in 2024, 44 years later, still talking about her and her impact. And she only made one feature film. And we're talking about that movie as being the 48th highest rated film in the Sight and Sound list, the most prestigious list. Like, I would understand, of course, I understand why people would see it as like a depressing thing, but I think it's such a like victory to like.
The story of her making Wanda is something that let thousands of people have dreamed about doing. So many filmmakers out there who wish to get something off the ground, and she was able to do it and make something that is really a work of art. Like it's a really beautiful film, even though it is, yeah, it is hopelessness incarnate within the film. Like you said, it is a positive story for her life because it was something she was able to accomplish. And even if she did describe herself as sort of like Wanda prior to making the film, it definitely just feels like a triumph seeing that she was able to make a film from start to finish, all in an exact year, too. She mentioned in the AFI interview that the exact same day she started production was the exact same day the next year the film premiered at Venice, which is really cool.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that fact. That's really crazy. And she also talked about how easy it was to have done it with one producer instead of like a big production company, because she didn't have a deadline and she could actually just work on it whenever she wanted. And if it never saw the light of day, well, no, whatever, like to her. But it did, and we're so grateful that it did.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, we're still talking about it. It's like definitely very, it made its way into the canon, and it's more than just a triumph, honestly. This is an amazing legacy to have. And it just goes to show how, yeah, we're sad that like she couldn't make more, but the one thing she did make is like so amazing, and it's just touched a lot of hearts, and like has hopefully influenced a new whole generation of filmmakers, you know?
Absolutely. Like, and it, I think it paved the way. It's one of the like pioneers of like independent cinema in the 70s, which ended up becoming the independent cinema that we know today. It's a pretty big triumph, and I'm glad we all agree that we all like the movie.
I know I mentioned the shot of her in the mall looking at the mannequins. I also want to talk about a few other shots I really enjoyed in the film, and a scene in general. It's the scene that takes place after Mr. Dennis robs a liquor store and they drive out into a field and a stunt plane starts flying overhead as they're eating food and drinking, and Mr. Dennis says if you don't have nothing, then you're a nobody. You're not even a citizen of the United States. You may as well be dead. And her reply, almost instantaneous, is, "Guess I'm dead." And just kind of chuckles. And he asks, "Do you really want to be dead?" And we don't get any response from her. I really love that scene. There are a lot of little there are a lot of little vignettes within this film that you can just look at on their own in terms of storytelling, and that scene to me is just a great little slice of Wanda that you could show to anyone and just feel like really moved by. I don't know, what do you guys think of that scene in particular?
I think it's one of those scenes that are very reminiscent of like these thing that like you have to have this ambition and this like, which is a very, it's a very capitalistic Western type of view on life, that you have to like have these physical material desires or else your life is worthless. And that's how like quote unquote they get you. It's just I think it's a really interesting scene. And like as you were talking about like the shots and the cinematography, one of the elements that stood out to me personally is how the film is really able to make a color palette that's very distinctive, with all the greens and aquas and blues that are present all throughout the film, from like almost the very beginning, from her outfits, the walls and the props, and that's mostly what makes the color palette. But it's all over, from the diner to the hotel rooms. It's such a like synonymous color palette to Wanda. I feel like it just feels so rotten. It's such a like gross physical color palette that I think really blends itself well to the film. I don't know if you guys had like any thoughts on the color of the film or the cinematography in general, outside of what you've already said.
There was one shot I really particularly loved. I think it was when she goes into the bathroom bar. I think you posted this one too, but I remember I took a picture of it when I saw it. It was like the mirror is like half cracked and you only see half of her face. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
I don't know what it is about it, but I think it's so evocative of like her trying to like just want like her, like Barbara herself describes, like just floating around trying to find like her identity in this all, like not knowing kind of who she is right now. Yeah, I really love that shot, and I didn't expect for me to love as many shots as I did, but it is like very well framed movie and like just very gorgeous.
That mirror shot is almost like they're framing her as not a full person.
Yeah,
Only
yeah.
half of her is seen, or that's how she views herself, as not a real person.
you only see half of her, but even the mirror is also half broken. So there's
Yeah.
all this empty space.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, it honestly feels like a collage, like a surrealist like painting.
I
Yeah.
mean, it could even represent bad luck.
Yeah.
Could have been Mr. Dennis who broke the mirror too. Knocked the bartender's face into the mirror or something.
Maybe it was Leonardo DiCaprio and he broke his hand while doing it.
Oh yeah. Well, did you know that Mr. Dennis, when he kicked a rock, actually broke his toe, but he kept
Yeah,
recording the
yeah,
scream.
and
Really?
the scream was real.
The scream was real. It's so good, such good acting. But another shot I really love in the film that aids to that color palette Eugenio was talking about is at the very beginning. It's a shot that's taken place from far away, a great distance away from Wanda, but you can see her walking along it's like it's around the coal mines as she's leaving her sister's house to go to court. She's wearing all white and she's got her white purse on and she's walking. She's so solitary there. She stands out like a sore thumb amongst all this darkness surrounding her, all the coal and earth that's around her. It's really beautiful shot. And it also encapsulates her loneliness of her just standing out but not, as if she's just the only thing there that exists. in that land, the only thing that's alive.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at that shot right now. It's a very apocalyptic shot. I think it's a great shot that really encapsulates a lot of what the film is trying to do, and it's a really long take as well. But yeah, she walks a long way, and it's a long shot, and it's a long take, and it's a really great way to like also set the pacing of the film with this kind of slow-ish, but also like very meandering perspective.
Yeah, meandering, almost maybe even also meditative.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely has those picture pong vibes.
yeah.
Okay.
I
Sorry.
I
Oh,
I've been thinking, and there's a quote. This is not really related to cinematography, but there's a quote from Vertigo, which really reminds me of this. One is a wanderer when two together are always going somewhere. And I should have brought this up earlier, but I think it's so true to this movie. Mr. Dennis himself, now that he has Wanda with him, it kind of puts a pressure on him to do more, and
mhm.
and Wanda is always a wanderer unless she has somebody to guide her.
Well, there is that aspect of Mr. Dennis trying to control what she wears. After she goes to the store, he throws away her shoes, tells her to wear high heels, get rid of the curlers because it makes her look cheap.
Yeah,
Very reminiscent of Scotty when, spoilers, nothing else.
and there was also this thing I wanted to bring up earlier. Once she comes with Mr. Dennis, her role is kind of so many roles at once. She is acting as like wife. They have like sex and stuff like that, and they like kind of live together now. But then she's also playing the role of his mother and the role of like his daughter. It's like so many roles at once. She's like doing what he tells her, and then she's also like a little kid, like just throwing away the onions from the burger, which is her
Yeah.
favorite scene. And she like gets thrown into like all these roles that are like that's this dichotomy the patriarchy creates between the mother and the whore, the two roles where like you can either be nurturing or you can be an object of desire, and she's kind of forced to fulfill both roles to the same person, and it creates kind of this very disturbing picture of what's going on screen. I don't know, it's just that one scene at the hotel room. He's like in his underwear, he's like crying that he doesn't have that he doesn't want the onions. uh,
It's so bad.
he's
It's
like a
so
little
bad.
kid.
Like, if I were Wanda, I'd just get the fuck out right then. Like, not even that. Just even before asking burgers without onions, get out of here, chump. Then
I would
leave.
do
Like,
that,
yeah. Onions, more for me then. Thanks for the money, bozo. I'm gonna buy some for myself.
but onions are so good.
Also, that's a very interesting characterization, or like a very interesting decision they put Wanda through. Like, Mr. Dennis gives her the money, and then she doesn't run away with it after she had just lost her own money. She does what she's told to do. And you can tell Mr. Dennis kind of jealous when he looks out the window and she's talking with the guy. He's kind of jealous, but he's also kind of worried that he's gonna like tell. And then we hadn't talked about this, but as soon as she gets there with the burgers, he hits her in the face, which is just like such a way to like, I don't know, introduce his character, because this is like only his the second film we the second scene we have with him, or well, the third scene. It's the bar, the diner, and it's now this, and it's so disturbing, and it's such a terrible character. What do you guys think about the flowers that he also tells her to get a hat, and she gets a hat with flowers, which again, it's kind of like these weird representation of like womanhood and like a
Yeah.
That feels very
like
50s.
twisted. Yeah. And then he throws her old clothes in goodwill. He's such a good guy. He's a good lad, a good fella.
Yeah. Also, while she was shopping in the store, he broke into someone's car and stole a suit. Even if it fit him or not, he just stole it, put it in his
Yeah.
probably stolen car too. Everything about him stolen. Not even a real person.
Yeah.
Identity. Not even a real identity. Like, you could look at Mr. Dennis as a character and just see the same type of existentialism that Wanda feels, except he's doing it in this very aggressive, violent, this maelstrom of violence that he's trying to depict, that he's in charge, that he's not he's not a follower. He can make his own life out of nothing, but he takes from others. The one time he tries to do good in a way where he's trying to be above his morals is trying to give his father money, to which his father refuses. And I actually really love the actor who plays his father, who is, again, a non actor, just a man that Barbara Loden found at a old folks' home that had an interesting face about him. He was really good in his portrayal, where he just was like, no, refusing it, refusing it. You could see a lot of their relationship in that one scene where Mr. Dennis wants to try to be the good son now, say, hey, dad, I've made it in life. Here's some money back for all those years. And his dad can just see right through him.
I really want to talk
Yeah.
about that scene because like it's the one time we really see Mr. Dennis like kind of vulnerable, you know? It's also like it adds to like the patheticness of the character because it's just like such a that it's like I hope you're a good boy, and you can kind of see the disconnect between the two.
Yeah, like he doesn't know what the fuck to say to him. Like, when's the last time he's seen him? A while, at least.
Yeah,
And even though we do see some sort of vulnerability from Mr. Dennis, all he's doing is painting another facade. He's wearing another mask from his array. Just this time, it's the daddy mask. It's for his dad. So
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, in the patriarchy, we all have like a role to play, if you will.
yeah,
yeah.
So, okay, I wanted to ask you guys, like, what are your guys's like personal experiences with the film? Because this is only my second time watching the film, as well, like with The Wizard of Oz. I watched it a couple of years ago, and I remember really liking it. It wasn't one of my favorite movies at the time. I didn't absolutely love it. But knowing more so what I was getting into in this rewatch, I liked it a lot more. It's a movie that really connects with me, especially in this like drifting existentially type of setting. And I don't know, I really enjoy the movie. I think it's really worth watching. I think it's deserving to be on the list. I think it's deserving of how high it is on the list, and it's just overall a great movie that I would recommend to anyone. Well, not to my like grandma, but to most people.
no. I'd recommend it to my neighbor. This was my first time
Okay.
seeing Wanda. I've had it on my radar for a long time, ever since I actually it's so I just keep bringing him up every time ever since I discovered John Cassavetes. I just read about filmmakers that were like him that had a similar style, and Barbara Loden, her name came up, and I had read about her story just briefly, just in passing. But her story definitely intrigued me, and the film did, and I'm really glad I was able to watch it. Not only watch it, but to get to really dive into her life and dive into this movie, not just from surface level, but really exploring its themes and the influence it really had on film history. I think it is extremely influential for American independent cinema, and I'm really glad I was able to watch it and discuss it with you guys. It was great, and I love it. I can't wait to rewatch it again too. Maybe even pick up the Criterion.
Yeah, I already talked about at the start like why I love this movie specifically, but like I remember just like this is gonna sound so dumb, but I was literally just Criterion shopping, and I had never heard of this movie before, and I only picked it up because of the cover. Something about the cover just like stood out to me. It was like her face and just the name Wanda. So I just bought the Criterion, and it took me like around 6 months to finally get around to watching it. But I just yeah, like I said previously, like it connected with me, but I didn't know how why. I thought I just loved the movie because of like how again bringing him up again, but how Cassavetes it was like just how because like I said previously, I loved like those cinema verite, like Jean-Luc Godard, Cassavetes, like hands on the camera, like it's just super inspirational to me. Like we can all make the movies we want basically as long as we have something important to say, or like not even important to say, as long as we feel a certain way and just translating that to screen. There's really nothing that should be stopping us from making the art that we want to make, and just this time around just learning more about Barbara Loden and like more of like how this film's place in the canon, and just like it made me love this movie even more. And not only is it remaining in my favorites, but it's definitely something it's definitely a film I cherish a lot more now. And it's like a movie that I'm definitely gonna revisit more in the future for like not just inspiration, but just because it's just a lovely film, honestly, and I adore it. It's one of my all-time favorite movies, to be honest.
I'm glad we got to discuss it so thoroughly. Yeah, it was a rewarding discussion, at least for me. We never talked about the bank scene.
We never talked about the bank scene. I mean,
We
it's
don't.
just his ultimate failure,
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
we talked about this. I feel like it's better we still don't talk about because that's not the movie. It's not the bank robbery. It's just
No,
It's
it's
not,
about a
I
girl who
agree.
it's about a girl who robs a bank, right?
it's about a girl
From
who robs a bank, right? No, Bill.
yeah.
I told this to Eugene. I don't know if I told you, but I also hated the way he was like talking to Barbara. Where it's like, "So you're poor, right?" It's like, "No."
Yeah, fuck this. Fuck Dick Cavett, really. If you're listening to this dude, okay, cool, but fuck you. Like,
That was so
God,
fucked
he's
up.
so unprofessional the way he was talking to her.
And then we was like, "Oh, that was you." Like I can't tell if that was a bit or not. Where he was like,
I
"Oh, I
think it
didn't."
was something I really didn't like about these interviews they had for Barbara Loden is I felt like the only thing they wanted to talk about with her was how did you as a woman manage to get funding to make this movie? And they didn't even ask her about like, well, I guess maybe they're a little too dull to ask. Like Dick Cavett's a little too dull to ask about the themes of the movie, but it just made me feel bad for Barbara Loden. Like she needs her directors on directors roundtable with Cassavetes or some shit. Like something better than that.
It's also like who in that audience is actually gonna watch Wanda or has I can bet you $1,000,000 that none of them watched Wanda.
So stupid. I mean, Dick Cavett definitely did not watch that movie, like 100%. I don't think
Oh
he did.
no, no, he watched the movie about the girl who robbed the bank. He watched Bonnie and
Yeah,
Clyde.
he watched. Yeah,
I'm
The girl who
surprised we
robbed the
didn't
bank,
mention Bonnie and Clyde.
right?
the Florida Project, right? Sean Baker.
No, sir, I am not Tom Baker.
Tosa and Tango, it's a movie about those guys who rob a bank.
A lot of walking
Yeah.
around in that one.
So I guess I mean I know I said this first episode doing ratings. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10, by the way. I saw that Souffle upped his rating. Very based. Very
Yes.
cool.
Um,
What is it now?
I originally when I first saw it, it was an 8 out of 10, and then I bumped it because it was just a movie that like grew a lot to like a 9. I mean, ratings are arbitrary, but just to, I think I said I wasn't gonna do
Yeah,
ratings last episode, but I'm
yeah,
here
yeah,
talking about
yeah, yeah.
it.
You
No, but
fell.
anyway,
You
um,
failed.
I know.
I got you. I got you,
I
bitch.
know he got me. I become what I scored. No, but honestly, now based off personal, I 10 out of 10. One of
And
my
Yeah,
all-time favorites, inspirations. Love it.
yeah, you thought you were Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz succeeding, but you were actually Mr. Dennis at the bank.
I was
wow.
I was the
Well,
look. I wanted
and
hamburgers without onions, and they gave me hamburgers with onions. So now I'm rating fucking. Now I'm doing ratings on this thing.
yeah, exactly.
I give this movie a 0 out of 10 without burger without onions.
With a heart,
Yeah,
0 out of 10, no onion.
I gave it
yeah,
a burger without onions. Terrible.
it's a movie with onions. That's my new, instead of saying like, oh, a 0 out of 10 with a heart, it's a 0 out of 10 with onions.
Oh, I have a better review for it.
So good.
Okay,
Okay. Well, while you're changing your review, um,
Okay,
our,
wait.
our so each of us have a rec to throw out to spin the wheel to decide the mystery film what to discuss next. And I think while Souffle's editing his review still,
I'm not editing my
Eugenio.
review. That was a
Oh,
joke.
you're done already? Okay.
I have the
Care to
I have the
share?
I have the wheel
Care to
ready.
share?
I have the wheel
Oh,
ready.
okay. Okay. Well, Eugenio, do you have a pick?
okay, mine is Federico Fellini's 1960 film La Dolce Vita. We haven't talked about a non-English speaking film yet. And what else? What better than to talk about La Dolce Vita, a very influential, huge film in the history of cinema.
It's a good pick.
It's a movie. I'm just gonna say mine real quick. This is a movie I've been meaning to watch for the longest time. So many random people have recommended this to me, and even like directors. And recently got like a restoration movie I want to rec is The Mother and the Whore. It's over 3 hours, I believe. I think it's 3 hours and 40, if I'm not mistaken. and it just seems like something that I would totally love. And I think there's definitely, I don't know why, but it's just giving the vibes that it would be something interesting to talk about.
I originally had a pick, but I'm actually going to change it just very last second to Magnolia from 1999.
Oh,
I've already seen it, but hey, maybe we'll see it again, and this will be a chance for me to talk about Robert Altman's Shortcuts, which was the film's main essence, inspiration. But yeah, if you haven't seen Magnolia from PTA, it's just about a bunch of characters' lives woven together.
you guys want me to spin the wheel,
I already have
or
the
does
wheel.
anybody else have a wheel?
I already have the
Okay.
wheel up. So 3, 2, 1, spin. I just know Bill's gonna
Ooh,
win too.
I love the colors. This blue looks so nice.
Oh,
Wow.
La Dolce
Wow.
Vita.
Okay. La
So it's
Dolce Vita.
It's one
All
on one.
right, let me just pull on the hater cap for this movie.
No,
Why?
I'm just kidding. I'm just
What?
kidding.
no.
No,
No,
We're
Bill.
gonna pull out the
Sometimes that's
just
you wouldn't surprise me with
I'm
such a
be like, you
thing.
know what? This movie's missing frogs,
It's missing onions.
missing onions.
Yeah, I was gonna say that we're gonna pull out the onions for this movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull out the onions. Wow. Okay, so
We're all so bright.
Yeah.
guess we'll talk about La
Other
Dolce Vita, aka The Sweet Life, Federico
yeah.
Fellini.
Important thing to mention. Where can you watch La Dolce Vita?
Um,
Out of print Criterion Blu-ray or
yeah.
in the Fellini set.
I was gonna say I was about to say like you can, because I wanted to say that last week with Wanda. I was gonna be like, oh, you can watch it on the Criterion channel, but we didn't say that. Or on HBO Max. I think Wanda's on HBO Max as well. For the people who made it all the way and haven't seen Wanda, why would you? But it's on
All
the
they got out of
Criterion
it was
channel.
burgers.
But yeah, and La Dolce Vita is famously hard to acquire now. I don't know why I
I
said
mean,
that.
it's
I don't know
no
why I
like
bring it up with a movie
hard to cry. I
that
mean,
we
La
can't.
Dolce Vita's on HBO Max. I'm pretty sure.
I think it was. I don't think it's in anymore.
Oh,
No,
you
I
telling me it's
saw
on
it on
Paramount
YouTube
Plus?
originally.
Oh, maybe it's on YouTube. So to the
Yeah.
people who want to watch La Dolce Vita with us, you can do it on YouTube.
Yeah. If you want to watch Wanda, it's streaming on Burger King's website.
That's the biggest takeaway of the movie. There's burgers in it.
Yeah.
Burger.
All I'm gonna think about is burger.
All right.
Yeah,
I think that's it for episode 2. Really.
I
You know,
think
we had a
so.
good time. We're sandwiching this, you know?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I did find La Dolce Vita in
Okay.
HD on YouTube. Oh, it's a
Very
Criterion
good.
version.
Very good. Okay, so you guys heard it here first, folks. We're gonna watch it bootlegged on YouTube. So
The way Fellini intended.
the way he
Right,
intended, the chaotic
right.
YouTube
Yeah.
with the want to break from the ads halfway in between.
Yeah.